Welcome to the Propaganda Report. I'm Monica Perez, and with me today is Shane Hazel, the famous and infamous Libertarian candidate for Senate in Georgia in 2020 and the future candidate for Georgia governor when Brian Kemp's, or Stacey Abrams, if you like imaginary world, term is up in 2023. Shane is a former Marine and former neoconservative who now dedicates his life to libertarian activism, and I'm very excited to welcome him to the show. Hi, Shane. Thank you for being here.
Monica, it is such a giddy. Oh man, I can't tell you how giddy I am to be invited onto your show. Seriously, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, and I know it's because you like to think and exchange ideas, and that is why I'm really excited to talk to you too. And I before we dive in, because I've got some I want to pick your brain and just see what your thoughts are on some deeper issues. But before that, I think maybe if you could give us a little bit of a recap of, not at length, but just what got you here to where you are, and as a political activist who wants a voluntary society. And there you are on the stage debating Democrats and Republicans in arguably the most important race in the country, and then getting the blame by these clowns that you're the reason either of them. It's like if either of you even did what even if either of you subscribe to your own party's ideologies, as flawed as they are, even if you just stuck to that, it wouldn't be a razor thin. But anyway, so give us a little bit of how you got here, and then we're going to say, where do we go from here?
Boy, libertarianism is one of those things that just eats at you until you're just, so motivated that you got to go do something, right? Let's see. Where should we start? Let's do the abbreviated version. I think most people know my Marine Corps history and special operations and all that fun stuff. And so ran as a Republican, was stabbed in the back a multitude of times by the GOP at every level there was, saw that there was absolutely no salvation for these people in that giant machine that's failing. They'd rather just run it into the ground. So I left, got in touch with Michael Heiss and Ryan Graham down here in Georgia, who both convinced me that I was a libertarian. I was wasting my time with the GOP. And said, why don't you come over here and do something real? And so I said, yeah, man, cool. I don't think we're going to win at anything, but I think we could probably, change course a little bit. And so I did, and showed up at the Libertarian Convention down here in February of 2020. And they're like, hey, why don't you be the Senate candidate? And I was like, really? We're just going to come test the waters as a U.S. Senate candidate, huh? So yeah, I guess, I knew it was going to be a super important election. I will tell you, Ryan Graham said, hey, man, I've seen what you've done. And in terms of the Republican, the GOP with at the time, my podcast was The Rebellion and now Radical. And he's like, if you put in half the effort into, a Senate run, I think we're going to do okay. I said, look, man, I'm a full-time dad. I've got, full-time show, or I should say, show that I do a couple times a week on top of a mountain of other things in terms of, real life. And I said, this is going to be my hobby. And he's like, cool.
So, I was going to ask you that, how do you find the time? I mean, I find it stressful because I have 3 teens. I don't work outside of doing the podcast and stuff, but it can just like political stuff. It'll just expand to consume all of your time.
Yeah, you can't let it. It's a delicate balance. There's weekends are reserved for nothing but family now. I got to run my own campaign, and for us, we were fairly well insulated from COVID, just because we're up here in the mountains. We homeschool, and so we're trying to homestead and everything else. So it's all about not being impacted, and then thank God we weren't heavily impacted by this whole thing. But the balance in trying to do this all with family and a real life outside of this, you come down to ROI. What can you do? And these little things that people look at for God knows too many hours a day. These little computers in our pocket. Hey, I can reach people there. I can reach them with a podcast. How do I do more of this? And so COVID hits, and everybody's looking at their phone even more. And I was like, man, we got this. So I ran my own campaign. I diverted funding to charities and my local businesses and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't take, campaign contributions. And without, spending a cent, we sent Georgia into a runoff. So it was kind of proof positive of the concept that I had is like, we need to do more. We need to do more virtual. We need to be in people's, back pocket every time they turn around. They're looking at their phone, whether it's a program or a tweet or Facebook or whatever. Just be in front of people, be personable, show some humanity, share some stories, and by all means, talk about what's relevant. Talk about the lockdowns. Talk about it crushing people's lives. And when you can do all these things, there's a sweet spot, and it came together beautifully. And that was really my entire intent: is shove this thing into a runoff. We're going to have the primary, and then, obviously go into the general. If I can get this thing to go to the runoff election, we're going to make national coverage. On top of it, the other Senate race in Georgia in the same year, which never happens, was also going to a runoff. Yeah. I was like, man, the stars are aligned for something extremely big here. And so that was the goal. And we hit it, crushed it, sent them into the runoff. And with that, garnered the ire of the GOP across this nation. They're still figuring out, this guy, Shane Hazel, he cost us the election. I'm like, man,
that just infuriates me. And you've probably heard of this. Garland Favorito, voter GA in Georgia, is prosecuting a case or pushing a case that to inspect the ballots because of the funny business in November, although neither he nor I voted for Trump, but we still just want to look at those. And for me, I want to see the down ballot races like that race. But no matter what, the fact is that these guys, I've been watching this election integrity stuff for a long time. And Garland, it's so funny because he doesn't like the Republicans or the Democrats either. He's always defending some like awful person who doesn't deserve it at all. But it's so clear, even I, who thought that Senate race was so important, much more important than the Trump Biden thing. Yeah. It is absolutely 100% their fault. And if they only stood by their own stated principles, like my father was a traditional conservative, not a neoconservative. And people ask me, were you raised libertarian? Like, actually, I was, because that is what that was.
Right.
But I want to touch on one thing that you said about being a homesteader and a homeschooler and also doing this. That really speaks to something that I've kind of concluded after all this time. So I used to have that radio show in Atlanta on WSB on the weekends and just did basically what I do now. But in order to connect with people, I really focused on putting the Bill of Rights as the context for my conversations with them. So I believe that there are false flags, and the reason there are false flags is to get you to think that the world is a different place from what the founders set up, or that human nature has somehow changed so that these principles of law and liberty are no longer relevant. So I tried to keep it in that sense of the Bill of Rights. But as this COVID thing has happened, and I realized it's much more real than that, in that you can't just talk about liberty. You have to have that. You have to assert it. You have to assert the autonomy. You can't have liberty in the context of tyranny. You must assert your right to grow chickens, I say, and defend your land with guns. So you have to assert it by being able to do it, in my opinion. But there's another wrinkle, and I hated to admit it because I will hate to have to do it. But because we are occupied by this force, this I would say an occupying force, this post-constitutional government that claims legitimacy, they are occupying our land. So we actually have to go fight them on their turf. I hate to say it, in the halls of power, to make sure that we hold the line and don't give up gun rights or rights to have chickens. I mean, that's your rights to homeschool. So I feel like your holistic approach to parenting and life is a natural to include fighting that fight, not just the fight with soil and your self-defense, but that fight in the civilization, in the world of laws. I think it's very natural. And I feel like it speaks to kind of the personality that I've seen you demonstrate during those campaigns.
Yeah. Cut out for a little bit of your question. I think I've got most of it. The idea that you, like, when you said, like, how do you find time? Like, I just don't sleep a ton, right? Like, I'm always like, I work, like, just whether it's on this, whether it's real work, whether it's family work, whether it's homesteading, like, man, by the time the end of the day finally comes around, I'm done. The idea that you have to go out and make contact in your civilization, your society, your little home, right? with the people who are executives, which I think is really the kind of the key. Like I moved to this Cherokee County up here in North Georgia, and the first thing I did was like, hey, Frank Reynolds, the sheriff, I'm Shane Hazel. And, this is what I'm about. This is what I'm doing. Maybe you've heard of me, maybe not. I don't know. And I don't care. Like there are some things that are going to go on up here. I'm out of the way. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not taking their stuff. This is what I expect out of you as a sheriff. And so it's basically go out and start meeting people, at least introduce yourself and show them that you're a human being. And like, hey man, like I just want good for this community. I want us to be a freer society. And, the thing is even most Republicans in those positions, they have to kind of agree with you, right? Like they have to like, okay, man, like I get it. Like I get what you're saying, but at the same time, like I'm over here enforcing some of these laws, right? And so to be able to do that and have these conversations and change some things, like even locally with the mayor down in Holly Springs here just recently, like I think people are primed. I think they're ready for it. To be, self-sufficient is one of those things where you gotta also have to, lead by example in this liberty movement, right? If you want to be free, you have to be a person that no matter what happens in the world, like you're going to be okay. Can you grow your own food? Can you take care of your self-defense? Can you teach your kids? Can you do whatever it takes, right? To scrap by. And, obviously I've got a background in a lot of this kind of stuff, but it also just kind of goes to study and wanting to learn as you continue to grow older is like, you keep finding these new basket of information in your child, right? You're just kind of like, oh my gosh, this voracious appetite. You just keep, digesting as much as you can.
I also think that you make an excellent point about just going and saying hi, especially if you're in a smaller place, that it can be very intimidating to think I've got to change the world. Like my mother, she calls me and she's like, you should run for mayor there in that town. I'm like, Ma, I don't even know if they have a mayor in this town. I'm definitely not because I'm an anarchist and I'm not ready, but if she had said, you should sit in on the town hall once in a while, go to the council meetings, then I would do it, but I'm just like, okay, I've got to run for president. She literally says stuff like, you should run for president. You should. I'm like, yeah.
You got the best, like if your mom, if she's encouraging you to do this kind of stuff, like that's a really great mom, right? She believes in you.
And she loves Trump. And she's like, see, he wasn't a politician or anything. I'm like, really? I think he had an advantage over us, but that's okay.
Like billions of bucks.
Yes. And connections that go way back. But the point is, like, I find it all very intimidating to think of this big political machine. But even if, and I love this Harry Brown book, How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. Even if you have to carve out your own freedom, it's good, I think, to think about what that means. And you have an advantage because I'm sure you understand physical self-defense and also how to feed yourself and your family. But it is little things. And I do believe that is the way to start and not be incredibly intimidated. And there is a lot of time, but you have to take the first step. I mean, maybe there isn't a lot of time, which is something I want to ask you about.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Yeah.
And to your point, like as anarchists, right? Like we don't really believe in leaders, right? Like, so like to your question is like, why do this? Why get into politics for quote unquote power? Well, that's the thing with libertarianism, right? Like as an anarchist, it still exists. And I guess I could be an agorist. It's something that I think, if you want to be an agorist, I'm cool with it. Like the way people liberty, that's up to you. Like good, by all means, just keep doing it. Like we need more of every variety. But for me, like I see this as a platform for communicating ideas and education, all the way back into the anti-federalists and further back sometimes. So it's like, am I willing to take some time to share some experience and some knowledge, some humanity, some mistakes that I made to at least plant a seed, to at least get people to go, hey, maybe I need to go read a little bit. Maybe I need to kind of shrug off some of this murder cult indoctrination and maybe go take up this book that this one guy was talking about just on the subject. I'm not going to go too far down the rabbit hole, but that's the thing. Once you're in the rabbit hole, you just find other routes, right?
That is true. So that reminds me of something earlier you said that triggered the thought for me that Ron Paul had said at one point, I'm just here to spread the word. And I always defended Rand Paul because I thought, well, Rand Paul isn't here to spread the word. Rand Paul's here to actually get something done.
Yeah.
I'm just giving him the benefit of the doubt. He does stuff and plays into weird little dramas that Fauci, Trump, and like his role in the Freedom Act was weird to me. But I don't know. I don't need to know the real answer. I don't need to know if there's a rabbit hole there. But they had two valid approaches. Ron Paul's was to spread the word, and Rand Paul's was to actually win and try to make some changes inside. Sure. And I for right now, I know you can have different things in your life. I like the idea of spreading the word, but I feel overwhelmed by the amount of propaganda that was washing over our kids through screens. And I also find that I lay this entirely at Trump's feet. Well, not entirely. It's been going on for decades, but I feel like he was the last nail in the coffin when Ron Paul was beginning to reignite the excitement over the really brilliant principles, whether the Constitution was one thing or another, but the founding principles that we were sold and that we bought and that we defended, those principles are valid to the extent there will ever be, there's any hope for a self-limiting government. That was your moment. And people remembered that. And I do believe that's the line, and people hold it, and they got it from their parents. And Ron Paul reignited those echoes, those archetypes. And then Trump came, and it feels to me like he replaced that ideology with identity politics on the right. And now, even if you have kids in the Bible Belt or something who are more exposed to right-wing propaganda than left-wing propaganda, it seems to have been gutted of the ideology. And I really wonder if you've got thoughts or strategies on reigniting that passion for ideology, how to communicate it to people who maybe aren't as well-read or well-educated as you.
Yeah, it's humanity. If you can get people to actually sit down and have a conversation with your libertarian ass, it's like, like that's the biggest challenge. Is like, hey, I'm not crazy. I believe in your rights. I believe in every one of your rights, even the ones that aren't listed in the Bill of Rights. Right, the right to travel, the right of association, the right to not only self-defense but to preserve your life, liberty, and property. Like, if you can make that connection, and they're like, okay, wait a second, like, I heard you guys were, like, kind of Republican and kind of liberal. Yes. And like, nah, man, that's not us at all. Right. So how is it best done? I mean, staying on what's in the news cycle first and foremost. If you can say what's on the news cycle and people have ideas about those things, and you can introduce, the idea through humanity, open up their eyes, because what's, that old saying that I always butcher, it's, convincing people of the biggest farces in history is far easier than convincing people that they've been duped. Right.
Yeah.
So if you can lead with how you were duped, and then, start back at like 5 years old with the, compulsory murder cult indoctrination camps that you went to until you were 18. And then people will go, I went to those, right? Like,
yeah,
I remember 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Like, come on, man. Like, we know this isn't history, and we know this is just this whitewashed version. So as soon as you have that hook in them, I mean, right, like that, you find that commonality, like find commonality, bleed into people with your humanity, and get back to the core principles. And I think, like, I was 30 something years old before I said, all right, what are my principles? Like, what do I stand for? What will I be consistent across the board for my entire life? And, at first it was peace, liberty, and free markets. And I had to boil down free markets once I just realized it's like peace, liberty, and consent, right? So once you start to talk about these kind of things, I've just found inroads. If I can get that toe in the door, think about how long it took you to really become a full-fledged, like, anarchist, right?
Yeah.
It was hard. It was like, you had to swallow a ton of pills. I don't care if it was the Constitution. I don't care if it was, the American flag and the Pledge of Allegiance, or the Chief Justices. I don't care what it was they told you in the murder cult indoctrination camps. Like, you had to swallow some really, really hard pills over time. And all you're looking for in these initial encounters is not a full-fledged, hey, man, I'm a libertarian. It's, we read a book, we listen to like this, because if you like this thing that I'm talking about, I've got a world for you that you've never heard by design. And at that point, it's a question. You validated somebody's existence because you're willing to listen to them. If you're using the Socratic method and you can ask questions, there's a two-way street there, right? Because in so many, what I see, I mean, just God, yesterday, right? So yesterday's, like, I said something, it was probably a tweet, like, Joe Biden or Kamala or somebody, and then they showed me a picture of like Donald Trump with his big fufa right in the front of his pants. And they're like, how do you like this? And I was like, I don't care. Like, you think I'm a Trumper? And then this actually works against Trumpers to piss people off, right? And you're like, this is the level of dialogue that 5-year-olds have, right? Like, my kids are better than this. They can have better discussions with people. Like, we have to be those people that say, whoa, man, like, I appreciate you. You're a human being. I'm a human being. We've just experienced, life in different meat sacks. Like, let's just talk about some things and find our humanity. And then, at the end of the day, like, at least we can sit there and say, hey, man, at least they're a good person, right? Like, they might not have it all figured out. Like, I don't have it all figured out, but that's the key for me, is just go in there and find some humanity and get that toe in the door, because the rest will take care of itself.
That was actually, you touched on something that I noticed, and I really got burned with this in a way that other people don't always get. Because when I did that radio show, it was a call-in show. Yeah. So you don't realize how casually you can say stuff, especially if you tend towards partisanship or strong ideology, and you end up saying things about cops or teachers or liberals or anything. And all of a sudden you realize that you've just generalized in a way an individualist should never generalize, even if it's about political beliefs. And then if you understand, so I would be burned because they're cops and teachers in my own family who work for the government, who listen to my show. I'm like, why would you listen? A lot of cops listen to my show. Why would you listen to my show? Well, obviously they have a different perspective. They're taking their approach. And I feel like even with teenagers and stuff, they're really bombarded with the identity stuff. The identity stuff does not work if there isn't some truth in it, like Columbus. And I mean, just to think about what happened to the Indians, the American Indians, Native Americans, or slaves or colonized people or indigenous people. And even, I mean, this is a hot topic, but I look at like the way abortion is talked about, like they stand in the way of progress, or they're not human beings yet. And I try to say, these are atrocities that have been committed in the past that look at the political power that will stretch for centuries because you have not gotten your values straight. When they pull down a statue, they might build a statue of you. And 100 years from now, when they pull it down, are you going to be happy, that for what it was that you stood for? Or would you rather them not build a statue for you and you be able to make your arguments to St. Peter? Yeah, no, I'm with you.
You don't use money that was taken by force and coercion to ever make a statue of anybody.
Well, somebody could make it for you, but it's funny because I guess my husband said to my son, like, the worst thing you could ever be is famous. And my son said to my husband, that's what mom said. You don't want statues.
Too wise.
Do not want statues. But be careful what you are pursuing and make sure you treat yourself, because the winds can change very quickly and you could be on the losing end of that. And I think maybe that is also a way to appeal to the kids when they see that. Like, why would somebody who was so celebrated back then have such twisted morals? And in my view, it's because they weren't thinking hard enough about it or didn't have the courage or had something else going on. So maybe that is a good way to appeal to the kids, because they're very sensitive and they're very anxious. The kids these days are very anxious.
Rightly so.
They have fear. Yeah. So it would be nice, say, you don't have to be afraid. You're in complete control of what's important. And that's your value system. And if you know how, the food growing thing, literally, like if you had grass, my family is originally from Brooklyn. I was from the suburbs. But just having grass made you a hick. So we had no access to anything that would grow anything.
Yeah. It's funny, when I get just talked to about, my carbon footprint in the world, and I'm like, don't you live in a city? Like, you guys destroyed all the natural habitat of everything.
Right. Oh, that's the thing. When people talk about infrastructure plans and low interest rates and subsidize anything, I'm like, you know what? If the government stops spending the money and stops subsidizing movement, the price of or even subsidize the extraction of fossil fuel with the wars in the Middle East, the prices of fossil fuels would be so insanely high. You would never burn it in your car. Like you would never do that. And I just never understand how. I mean, they're just not thinking it through. Some people will think it through, but not too often. Certainly not in the propaganda. But yeah, keep going. Please talk.
Oh, I was going to say, also to your point about, some of these ways to help people get these really awful pills down a little easier, right? Especially with people like teachers and anybody who works for the state, cops, military, whatever. Listen, the rank and file, like I was them. Like I was that guy in the military that was the rank and file that knew nothing more than American Star Spangled amazingness, right? And when
you were willing to die for that.
Oh man,
you were willing to die.
I almost did quite a few times.
I believe it.
It's to give people that out, like those people have never heard of liberty. Like they've heard the word, but they don't really know what it encompasses. And so to give people that out is like, hey man, they've never heard this stuff. They've never been exposed to it. They've never studied it. Like this has been kept from people on purpose by the murder cult for very good reasons, because when people know this stuff, man, they're ungovernable. You can't govern people that know this stuff.
Yeah, that is a very interesting point. And I love my father to death, but he was a sailor in World War II, and he was a truck driver, and he was a butcher, and he had a gas station, literally. So no, he's total libertarian, but he cursed like a sailor, and although he would really roll over in his grave to realize that he taught me how to curse like a sailor, but I stopped doing it in my regular free podcast feed because somebody wrote to me and said, I want to share your show with people in my church, with teenagers. And you have a very simple way of explaining these principles of liberty in the context of things that are going on right now. Mm-hmm. And it was like the first time I ever thought, wow, I think I'm going to have to curb my language just in order to be able to reach out to those people who just haven't heard it and really need to hear it. So that's a very hopeful thought too. I mean, I feel like there are barriers put up, but I think you're right. If you talk to them, some of them, maybe even just one person might hear you.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, I get a lot of flack for swearing. I love profanity.
Oh no, yeah, go for it. I love it too.
As a Marine, I won't cuss on your show because I don't want you to have to edit it for your audience or anything. It's like the icing, right? Like I'm not doing it to be mean all the time. It's just like there is a vitriol reaction to what this murder cult does, right? And like,
yes,
guys, listen, I'm not them. Like, I don't want to point guns at peaceful people and enact war crimes ever. Not here, not there, not anywhere. So if my cussing can open a door, right?
Yes,
and say,
yes.
Oh, you're offended by this? Let me show you something that you'll really be offended by, right?
And with liberty, you don't want to control other people. It's the last thing you want to do. Not to mention that the art of vulgarity, I actually never hear you curse or swear because it's vulgarity. This is the thing. Like I'm a Catholic, and Catholics draw this distinction where you're not allowed to curse, like damn you to hell, or swear, like call God's wishes. But all the vulgarity is totally fine. That's why someone had to tell me about, like, it was like a Protestant church. Like, we can't listen to your show. I'm like, funny. Why the fuck not? Like, I don't, what the hell?
I was a Catholic for about a year and a half, and I gave it up for Lent. Never went back.
Well, you could have used vulgarity up the wazoo. And
I was.
Yeah, I'm sure. And drinking, we're allowed to do all the bad stuff. And I have Catholic listeners who write to me like, you've got it wrong. You make it sound like we're a bunch of like drunken sailors. I'm like, okay. I was raised by one, but
75% of you.
Yeah, maybe. And it's quite possible. But still, if you've got your values in place, that's really nobody's business. It's actually not a problem if I guess scandal or whatever. But if you sit around, get drunk as a skunk and don't hurt anybody, it's absolutely nobody's business. Yeah, and the same thing with
every other drug, right?
Drugs, exactly. That's why I always say like high on alcohol, because I want people to realize they're just high on alcohol, which is the worst anyway.
That's right. Yeah, it's a plant that grows out of the ground, guys. We're easy, right? Like,
yes. So here's a question. I want to get to that Rand Paul thing. Do you see a path where you can use both the like internal, I'm taking care of my family and I'm growing stuff, and the kind of outreach thing where you talk to people or run for office or whatever. Do you see a path from here to there, how we could actually get people on board with a voluntary society and move towards that? Or, I mean, do we have to have a revolution first?
No, I don't think we do. I think I'm kind of the guinea pig again. And this, like, I'm like, hey, I really don't need society, but here's the thing: is I also have a responsibility because I've seen some things, right? Like, there's some corrections that in my past I need to atone for. There's going overseas and doing the murder cult's business. There's something in me that is like, hey, like I've got to probably spend the rest of my life atoning for this to make sure that some poor kids or some poor fathers or anybody else doesn't suffer at the hands of this government, either here or there. So I think that's really why I'm doing this in the first place. So I think there is a path. I think especially through executive offices, I think we're a post-constitutional republic at this point. I think the Constitution is an amazing tool to help people who are, especially on the right side of things, go, oh yeah, you know what? This is what it says. He is right. He is well studied, if not an expert in the Constitution and the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists. Let's listen to a little bit more of what he's talking to say, or what he's saying. So if I can take mayor's offices and I can take sheriff's offices and I can take governor's offices and damn be, DC, I can sit there and start having conversations about nullification. I can start it. And what the thing is I can relate it all back to that Constitution. So if it even gets us back to, I don't know, like a minarchist type society, I'm cool with that in my lifetime. Like,
yes,
I've done something right. Like, your rights are recognized. I'm cool with that. Like, they're not out here fleecing us for, our income. I'm okay with that. Like, if I can get rid of civil asset forfeiture, if I can get rid of the drug war, if I can get rid of, nonviolent crimes, if I can do all of these here locally, there is a path. It's just to say, okay, guys, I know you like what we're doing now, but let's talk about it even further. Right. Like, and I had this great conversation with this one lady who's part of the Libertarian Party here in Cherokee County. And the conversation was something I just don't know how we do this with police. I was like, well, let me explain something. Let me ask you some questions. And so I said, listen, at the end of your traffic stops, do you feel like when you see a police officer out in the wild, do you feel safer or do you feel anxious? The answer was anxious. And I think most people feel anxious about it unless they're a cop, and maybe even still then. And I said, okay, so at the end of your interactions, do they say, did you enjoy your service? How was your service today? Is everything okay? And it's just like, no, they don't say that to me. I was like, all right, so let's put policing in the hands of Chick-fil-A, right? Let's put it in the hands of somebody that really cares about their community, that really has to perform to get paid, right? The entire attitude changes. It's like, minimally for ROI, what do we have to do to please our customers, right?
There are examples of that. There are towns that have a sheriff or a cop who is like that. I've seen videos of them talking about, hey, nice gun.
Yeah, exactly, like, right. And you're like, that's the entire conversation right there. I had a convert and said, you know what? I would much rather have Chick-fil-A in charge of the police or any local organization.
So I agree with you, of course, that like the voluntary thing, and it would just be a voluntary. I mean, I think self-defense, the idea of mutual self-defense is totally overblown anyway. Like individual self-defense, the absolute strict four corners of your private property is probably 99.99999% of it. And if you're not antagonizing people, Iran's never going to nuke your farm.
Yeah, nobody's touching you, right? No. We're good.
Yeah, I'm all with that. But the reason I said like there are examples of that, of like the little small town cops who are agreeable or, recognize that your right to self-defense augments their ability to do their jobs. But the reason I was saying that is that you were saying, yes, I could be a minarchist. And that was a question I actually didn't, vet with you in advance. I have a long list of things I wanted to talk to you about. But this was what I was going to say. Would you... it goes to the judicial review question. So you were having a debate. It was Michael Nickens, maybe on your podcast. So I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I listened to a lot of it. It was good.
Listen to that whole thing, man. I'd give you a medal for listening to that. That was super tough.
There was a lot of cursing after that one. So no, but one of the things was that I thought it was amazing to me because I've had this thought and I was surprised to hear you say as the one thing where you thought the Constitution took the fatal step, exactly what I think is judicial review, that the Supreme Court asserts this authority to assess Congress's right to pass their laws. It defies it defies logic. It defies the logic of the separation of powers. Wouldn't be separation of powers if one of them has total control over the other. And there's no enforcement mechanism in the Constitution. So if the Supreme Court says this law is wrong and tells the executive's method, he can execute the laws, but he can't force states to execute laws. There's no mechanism until, and I uncovered this in my interest in how flawed the judicial review is, until the Department of Justice was created. Guess why? Guess why the Department of Justice was created?
More centralization. I don't know exactly what event it was, but I guarantee you it was because states were going, I don't think we're going to do that.
It was in the South after the Civil War. Even after the Civil War, the South would not accept all of the laws of Congress. So they had to create an enforcement mechanism, which makes the FBI, the DOJ, like profoundly unconstitutional, a severe violation of the separation of rights. So of separate powers. And I totally agree with that, because what you want is just state nullification. You can pass your laws, Congress, but we're not going to enforce them. Yeah. And that just shows you it was a confederacy and not, like a big nation state. But my question to you was going to be, if you could go to the moment before that, and then I couldn't ask the question because the moment before that led to that moment, and every moment before always leads to the next moment and the next moment and the next moment. And here we always will be. Right. But if there were a way, which I don't think so, which is why I'm an anarchist, that there is no way for, you'll like this, that it's just that the idea of self-limiting government, that is the utopian fantasy. That is not voluntarism. Self-limiting government. But if you could have it, would you accept the Constitution? And I would accept the Constitution if it could, I would take that compromise.
In my lifetime, if we get back to a constitutional government, I'll feel like we have succeeded in freeing a lot of people. I really would. Expectations, right? You got to manage some expectations. I'm a dreamer and an optimist, which is kind of like, it's tough in politics. You're gonna get crushed here and there. But if I could get it back to that point, I probably would take it. And here's the thing: is like, would I amend some things? Like, would I say, hey, listen, all the clauses that are there, like the General Welfare Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause, like all of these open-ended things that the Anti-Federalists are like, yo, hey guys, this is how this is going to go down.
Oh,
right?
They flagged them? I knew some, but I love Patrick Henry. I have the answer. I have like volumes of the Anti-Federalist Papers. There's a lot of them.
Patrick Henry, Brutus, the Farmer, all the. If you guys don't know the Anti-Federalists, I actually do them. I need to do another show, and maybe my next show again is the next Anti-Federalist. I'm up to like 30 out of 85. I think.
There's a lot. Like I thought I bought the whole thing, but I just bought one volume. I was just gonna collect them all, but there's just so many.
It's funny to see them too, because when you compare them to the Federalists, they're very succinct in the way they argue, which I think gives great credit to the idea of decentralization and liberty versus all the tricks and gimmickry and language that the Federalists had to lose. Like they call them if you want to, the Anti-Federalists went back, there were prophets, and they were basically like, look guys, they're going to use all these hobgoblins and bugbears, which were, obviously what they're talking about is fear, right? And when they talk about fear, they're going to use this as debt. They talk about the debt with France. They talk about it with the Netherlands. They talk about all this, all the Indian tribes in terms of going to war. Like it's the same damn playbook, the same modus operandi, like they use then as they use now, only obviously they have a giant, broadcasting system that they manipulate people with. So I would accept it. with some changes, but yeah, I mean, in my lifetime, if we get back to the fact that we all have rights, I mean, that'd be a cool thing.
Yeah, just restoring the Bill of Rights, I would accept that. And I agree. And the thing about the Constitution, the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, the Federalists were promoting the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists wanted to retain the Articles of Confederation. I think, as you and Pete Q were saying, like, there's anyone who doesn't know that the Constitution was a coup just doesn't know history. I mean, there was no mechanism to replace the Articles of Confederation. There just wasn't. That was the foundational document of the nation, to the extent it was a nation, the Confederacy. And that's that. If you destroy that, you destroy the Confederation.
And what were you told in school? What was, like, seriously, what was the one sentence in your history book? Everybody knows it.
I don't know. The founders were, George Washington was the first president.
The Articles of Confederation were
didn't work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's all they ever said about the Articles of Confederation. You're like, all right, I got you guys.
That goes to the fundamental myth of our time, which I've said before, and I'll say it again. Like let's say it's true. Not sure it's true, but that in the Middle Ages, it was like unthinkable to question the existence of God. Like, it was just, people were like, what? But now it's unthinkable to question the necessity of government. People are like, oh, you're an anarchist. Everyone just kill each other. That's like what you had in that debate with Nickens. It was like, I just don't know why you want everyone. They can't control themselves. They're all going to kill you. It's like, of course, that's why I want my guns back. The government's the problem. The government's the reason I can't defend myself against all the people who want to kill me. And by the way, most people don't want to kill you.
There's this other thing, right? Like, well, most people don't kill people on a daily basis. Right.
No, because it doesn't work in the long run. What are you going to get? Then they're not, the real trick is to enslave them, which is what the government does to us, because you just kill, but it just doesn't work that way. Anyway, most people find that they don't have the power to dominate other people. So they don't want their own chickens.
Yeah. And so they also avoid, retaliation. They avoid putting themselves in danger. And it's much easier to sit there and go, hey man, like, maybe I'm even a little short. Could you extend me a little bit of credit and depend on people's good nature? Like, most people are good people.
I agree. I
do. I would like to hit on the point that when I call it a murder cult, like, I'm talking about this like by design, because of, the aristocratic combination of what it is. It's like, it's the government, it's the corporations, it's the banking cabal, it is the propaganda machines, it's the schools, it's everything that they touch, right? And it's also got the documents in terms of the sacred text. It has, slaughter in terms of sacrifice in it. It has all of these things. It has, the black robe people and the chiefs and everything else, like the bishops, the Pope, like, it's all there. It's a religion of the state, and people have been, so, force fed and brainwashed that they're like, oh, separation of church and state. No, guys, the state is a religion in itself, and it's compulsory. Like, that's the problem.
And it seems like to me, and I hate to be so simplistic, but it seems like the actual state religion is now healthcare. It's the scientists, it's the doctors, and those sacred texts are literally written in Greek. They're literally written in Greek, and you're not allowed to. If you say, like, I'm reading this trial right here of the vaccine, and they're like, how are you qualified to read? I'm like, well, it's mostly in English, and the Greek things I can look up.
Right.
And who the hell are you? Like, I could have gone to whatever school you went to and gotten whatever letters you have. Like, what I probably paid for it. So
when you read peer-reviewed doctors, like, I kind of consider that a pretty good source of information.
Yes, of course, or at least of a value. They have to lay out their reasoning. So when you use that religion aspect of it, also taps into the fear thing. So right now, it feels like that lockdown last year was an undeniable evidence of a truly post-constitutional country. This is going down the rabbit hole a little bit, but do you feel like it's okay? What you see is what you get. Like, COVID was scary and those guys were doing their best. And now we need these vaccines because otherwise we'll all die. Or do you think that they exploited a real crisis, that they fomented a crisis? Like, what's your view of the past 18 months?
Yeah, so there are some things that are still very classified in terms of what the state does with disease, right? Like we have, like in the military, we have this thing called NBC, nuclear biological chemical experts, right? And within those fields, like one of the things that they do is they make sure that you perish slower than the enemy on the battlefield. And you go through all this training for this kind of stuff. Do I think this stuff was cooked up in the lab? I do. I think they weaponize stuff all the time. I think AIDS was weaponized. I think COVID is one of those things that they have, done what gain of function, like all these. I think yes, right. In terms of these things leaking and getting out, do I think it was planned? Could be. I can't say for sure. But here's the thing: is like when I think was it 2016, 2017 when Fauci came out and said Donald Trump will face some type of pandemic within his 4 years, and I was just like, whoa, like okay, that's a hell of a prediction, man. So I do think there's a lot of people who saw an opportunity on top of a bad situation. And, obviously the old saying is you never let a good emergency go to waste. So they all piled on this, including the Republican governors. And they said, let's see how far we can take this thing. Right. I think it's backfired. I think they went too far, too fast. I think they were sloppy. I think, all of these things have come back and hit them in the butt. Do I think it was a trial run? I don't think it was a trial run. I really think that these guys thought that this was it. I think that they thought, this is the way it's going to go. Now, I like the conspiratorial side, and to see, what it is and who's involved and go back in history. The addition of Fauci and Bill Gates together, I think, is a very fascinating subject, right? Like these guys knew each other in college, right? So they've been boys for a while.
Part of the new revelation about the Fauci emails. I don't remember that thing about Gates. I know Fauci's dark history. That I absolutely know.
Right.
And Gates's as well, but I didn't know they were connected figures.
Cornell, Cambridge, wherever the hell they went. They
Cornell
knew each other.
Right.
The other understanding that I think Bill Gates' dad was on the board of Planned Parenthood.
Yes, before Roe versus Wade, if I do my math right.
And obviously Fabian Socialist set up Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, and all these kind of things. So if you understand that that's all population control by design, and that Bill Gates is all about vaccines, and he got kicked out of places like India for introducing more vaccines, and the rate of autism went through the roof. And then he's talking, and other, bits and pieces here and there about, the population of Earth, can't be sustained in what we're doing. I don't know. You just look at it and you're like, he's a second generation guy.
Yes. To have the gene therapy that they're administering to people all around the world in the hands of an intergenerational eugenicist family kind of makes you wonder, like, if the guy's number one goal has always been population control and he's the guy in charge of vaccines and healthcare, you've got to think that there's something behind that. But then there's also the money stuff. I mean, there is a lot of money in it, especially, and this is where the state, so people like to point to the evil capitalist big pharma, which I'm right there with you. It's whatever you want to call it. It's really fascism, corporatism. But the genius coup that they executed, it could not have happened without the government. What the government does is they forcibly take your money away from you and they put it in a kitty, and then they tell you have to go get this thing that they then pay for. So they make you buy a product that completely disconnects your decision-making authority. Yeah. I mean, they need a new word for that kind of fascism. I think it might be like Nazi, but it seems to me like what the Nazis did, but it's just a whole new level. Yeah.
Yeah, like the fact that they're trying to do this again in history so close to when it happened last time, you're like, guys, like, they did this. Like, there's plenty of us. There's still people who are alive that were part of that entire part of the Germany fiasco, right? Like, this isn't going to happen again the way it is. And thank God for guns. But I mean, yes, the whole thing is I think somewhat scripted. And I think one of the biggest tales of this entire thing is the omissions, right? It's like, hey guys, like we're working on some mRNA, we're working on some shots that are, like we've deleted all the clinical trials that we've ever done because it leads to, the body attacking itself and autoimmune deficiencies and animals. Like, we're not telling you that part of it. We're not talking about that. We're also not talking about ivermectin, which was a 2015 Nobel Peace Prize winning medication.
Therapeutic.
Yeah. People were using it for antiviral, antibacterial things and livestock and things like that. Being a homesteader and, being somebody that's been around animals, like, what ivermectin is, right? Like in small doses, people who have, I should say physicians who have put people from the ICU on this have gone home at over an 80% rate. The fact that Fauci talks about his vitamin D uptake somewhere around 7,500 or 8,000 units a day. Yeah.
Wow.
And that doesn't, he never talks about that. Like, it's all of these omissions.
Interesting that what you're saying is making me think of something I hadn't thought about before. And just by the way, James says he doesn't think the college buddy thing is true because he researched it a little bit and found the agent work, but whatever, it doesn't matter. They're definitely from the same cloth. But what you were saying about, what ivermectin is, what these things are, I had COVID and I totally was borderline not believing in it. And it was a totally different thing from a flu or a cold in my experience, completely different. The only thing that made me feel better when normally I kick things within 24 hours, I was 2 weeks into it. And I started drinking tonic water, I would even drink gin and tonics with a lot of lime because my dad, who's real old school, would say, hey, he would joke, he would have gin and tonics and he'd say, hey man, I'm curing malaria, I'm curing scurvy, just back off, hon. I'm just taking care of my health. Okay. So 7 years old, I could make a great gin and tonic, whiskey sour in case you need a little, whatever, lemon juice. So I realized then, and I came upon a couple of articles that the lung problems is something that happens as a result of low oxygenated blood. Yeah. So I concluded, and I'm not the first person to think this, and a lot of people are saying this is really a blood disease. I think Dr. Andrew Kaufman said it first well over a year ago. It looks like a blood disease. If they allowed us to think that, so they call it respiratory disease instead, but if they allowed you to think of it as a blood disease, people who understand things about natural medicine or natural remedies would have approached it differently. Instead, we're all thinking that it's a respiratory thing, or a localized viral episode, which would have a very different, that's you're washing your hands all the time and wearing masks. I think that stuff maybe even be a deliberate wrong direction because they really want to sell us what they want to sell us. Now, and I did want to, as a follow-up on that, is say, so I see the money and as a thing, I don't usually go to the money first. Do you feel what's the true nature of power in the world today? And are they after money? Are they after power? Is it, some people go as far as transhumanism. I know I'm called a conspiracy theorist, but I don't even have my mind around transhumanism or aliens. But what do you think it is? Is it money? Is it power? Is it world government? What's your big picture?
So I obviously understand the lens through some different, or I should say, kind of just my reality, right? The way I look at things, a lot of it reverts back to the military and maybe even post-military. So in what I see is you've got a population that's aging right now, a huge population. The baby boomers are aging out. And that means they're starting to collect Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all these programs that are, obviously bankrupt. And as a veteran, I see the similarity when you go from an asset, right? A government asset. So for us, when you get out of the military and you're now a veteran and you go to the VA, you're a liability. You're not in the asset column anymore. You're a liability. Here's your pills, man. Take this pill salad. You probably don't need any of these things, and they're probably going to do, some really bad things to you. But here, go take this. And at the end of the day, if you guys die, we really don't care, right? That's really the kind of that's what I've seen in my own life. So if I apply that to the aging senior citizens in this country, and now they've gone from paying in on taxes now to being a net drain on taxes, and they're no longer a contributing part of the workforce, you're looking at liabilities of the state, and the state's just going to sit there and go, boy, we got a lot of liabilities, guys. Like maybe we should take them out. Maybe we can give them shots. Maybe we can house them up, and torture them, because let's face it, torture and isolation is a big form of torture, right? Like to feed them all this different information, to make them kind of psychologically crazy on top of deprivation of a year. Boy, you can get people to do a lot of things just to get back to quote unquote normal, get your rights back, right? Here's this injection. So what if, right? What if, in 9-10 months from now, after people have got this injection, autoimmune deficiencies start happening all over the place. I mean, we've all heard what it does to women and the menses cycle and everything else, and you're just like, boy, like if this is somehow even contagious after that, you're like, nobody knows.
Yeah, that you're answering a little bit of the kind of follow-up question I wanted, which was if, like, when you talk about, okay, the state looks at it as an asset versus liability.
Yeah.
I think it's easier for me to get my mind around it as a microcosm of like maybe a state not as giant as the United States or whatever, that, the octopus of world power, and think of it more on a local small level. And once you bring in that population control element, there's a person who's hook I can hang that on, which is Bill Gates, for example. Yeah. But when you see, I do want to follow up on that, though. If you see in that microcosm of like maybe a smaller country that I don't know how, I think you probably have a really good sense of how the power really worked in some of the places that you were stationed. Mm-hmm. Do who's the state? The state, c'est moi, right? The state is the person. The state is Saddam Hussein. The state is whomever. Is that how it works in the Middle East and some of those small countries? Is there a person or a family who is the state? And do we have the equivalent of that? Because that would give it more of that kind of agency.
It's more of, like I hate to do this, but it's more like Hydra, right? Like if you're a fan of Marvel, if you've got kids like I do, like Marvel is more or less right on the button with, what it is. It's this multifaceted, unstoppable machine, and it's corporate interests, it's banking interests, it's government interests, it's everybody acting in their own selfish interests that can live off of other people, and they don't care who they have to kill or who they have to cage to do it. So when you look at places like the Middle East, like Mossadegh was our first coup in the Middle East in Operation Ajax against Iran, right?
I know that one.
We went in, the CIA helped out the UK because BP was having trouble getting the oil from underneath Iran's sands, and they're like, we're going to cut this shit out. And ever since, that's been the entire driving force for the distrust and the animosity between us and them and the UK and them and everything that's going on in the Middle East. So when you look at it that way and you say, hey, you know what, Saddam, yeah, as Scott Horton would say, clean shaven chin, guy in the Middle East. Yeah, he's a monster and everything else. But here's the thing is, we backed him. We gave him, the gases that he used in Anfal and everything else, where he slaughtered tons of Kurds and tons of Shiite and things like that. Anybody that's a problem, like Syria, maybe we're not getting a pipeline through. Let's go in and do some war crimes, right? Like the international community is withdrawing from Syria. I'm going to gas my own people. No, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. Gaddafi, a lot of people talk about, how he wanted to get Africa on a gold standard, and they're like, nah. Not to mention, he's also kind of like, I don't think we should probably be running, these guns and everything else from here to Syria, like. So, yeah, it's more or less who are the players behind the scenes, and it's everybody, obviously the banks, I think, are probably the biggest part of what goes on, because, what's the old saying from Rockefeller? If I print the money, I don't care who makes the laws, right? So,
yeah, I think that's very illuminating. And I always thought of I thought of the banks, finance, defense, and energy as being the big three of the military industrial complex. And then I thought big pharma, big farms, or big ag and big tech were underneath it. Now I feel like that's going to flip, but it's very illuminating how you put it, because I find that, and I actually wonder sometimes if this is a trap in a conspiracy researcher's world, that like the conspiracy gets too high. Like then all of a sudden you've got aliens, And it's, what can you do with that? Right. So I'm not up with the aliens, but I mean, I'm not saying there aren't, but I don't go there. But like, I do sometimes wonder if there is that occult cabal, that there is some weird, secret society stuff. Some of this stuff looks like black masses, like 9/11 or whatever. But maybe it's as simple as
Jeffrey Epstein's island. I mean, what the hell is that white and blue brick building on it? You're like, what the hell? Like, if I had billions of dollars, that's not what I would do. And I know different strokes for different folks, but Jesus Christ, like, we know that guy's a pedophile. We know everybody associated was a pedophile. Like, these guys are monstrous thieves and murderers. And like the fact that, everybody's like, oh, they're different, the Democrats and the Republicans. You're like, dude. Do you see?
I know that's ridiculous. But even with that, like you're down to earth. It's that's
I try
really crazy. It's only down to earth, like from the 60,000 perspective, but feet perspective. But the down to earth thing being that it's like it is ultimately money, power, relationships, desires. Like even the Jeffrey Epstein thing. I imagine if you are worth billions of dollars, you own countries, you really don't have to follow laws. Maybe you are literally sit around thinking of ways to satisfy a deeper and deeper appetite. I mean, it is quite possible that that's what that all is about. And it isn't anything about sacrifice. Or maybe you fantasize or actually tap into, I don't know, a magic, a power. I'm not even going to the magic. I'm just saying like that you think, because they do rituals. These secret societies do rituals, right? So why do you do rituals? Either to get real power or to make it look like to other people that you have tapped into some supernatural power. So,
well, not only that, but like when you really understand like the history of religion too, right? Like I've been telling my listeners about this book, The Immortality Key, that some of my readers turned me on to. The hijacking of religion at Christ, right? Like unbelievable what they did in terms of taking psychedelics away from people and sterilizing the communion and all this stuff. Like you're just like, once you've done some psychedelics, right? And I mean, be safe, like do drugs like an adult if you're going to do them. But once you've done some psychedelics and you understand like, oh shit, like they're hiding this kind of stuff for a reason, right? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. So you start to go, okay, well, yeah, you know what? Maybe the occult is real. Maybe the fact that they have a whole bunch of stuff locked up inside the Vatican that this guy, Brian Maraska, I think is how you say his name. Super, super smart guy. This whole thing, you're like, everything's been a lie. Like everything is been a lie from the very beginning from these people, including your favorite religion. And you're just like, holy cow, So, to understand, to your point with aliens, Paul Krugman being the economic advisor to Barack Obama when he talked about spurring the economy by faking a alien invasion back in 2008, 2009. I think Bob Murphy and Tom Woods did an entire show on Contra Krugman about the whole thing. And you're sitting there going, all right, we got a Space Force now, and they're releasing documentation on off-world type vehicles, and they're prepping society for maybe a alien war. And you're like, man, you sound like a crazy person. Well, here's the thing is these people have suppressed everything from the time of Christ. They have told you fiction after fiction after fiction that is provably false. And you're sitting there going, yeah, all right, I'll be crazy. You can throw stones and call me names. By all means, I don't give a damn. Like when we're talking about the murder cult, there is nothing that they won't do for power. Period.
That is very interesting. And the fact that there is that what is literally occulted information, literally secret information, that is definitely meaningful. I mean, there are secrets. They're keeping secrets for sure. No question about it.
Yeah.
So, I might have to read The Immortality Key. That might be my next big book. Is it great?
It's so good, and I'm telling you,
Really?
you need to stretch your brain because, and to give you a little bit of a purview, like Brian is classically trained, and I think one of the Ivy League schools in ancient Greek and ancient, like he's a linguist. This guy can read everything from ancient Greek to Latin, and to he'll go into Spanish or French or German. He can speak Aramaic. He can read all of these ancient texts, and he travels. And he asks the questions, and like he hasn't done psychedelics either, which is even more interesting because you're like, he wants to stay kind of away from this kind of thing, and be objective, right? And you're like, to listen to this guy go through times and places and people, and just hear him switch between Latin and Greek and all of the history. He's like Indiana Jones, only better, and it is a book that will bend your mind.
I'm going to get it immediately. And that's another interesting point about the languages. I see videos that these conspirers are saying in English and nobody's watching them. I read books that are in English that nobody's reading. Imagine if it was in a foreign language. Like even I wouldn't know it. Like we're in this tiny percentage of people who know some stuff that isn't in the mainstream media. I wouldn't even know that. And think about how English is just taking over the world to the point where some countries, like their own language is a minor language. I mean, that is interesting. So we could obviously go on and on, but I want to make sure that we learn a little bit about your plans for the next step. Are you really running for governor?
Absolutely. 100%. I am going to seek the nomination of the Libertarian Party here in probably January, February of next year. So, yeah, putting in the work and the diligence on this ever since Brian Kemp came out and said something to the effect of, in his most twangy, ridiculous, if you see people gathered in a group of 10 or more, tell them to disperse. And if they don't, call us.
These people. Oh my
What?
gosh.
You're a maniac.
I had such dirt on Brian Kemp. When I had my radio show in Atlanta, Kemp and Stacey Abrams were duking it out. And people would this is just another one of those things. Like for Caitlyn Jenner, for example, it's like, I think he or she or whatever is kind of full of shit, but it's entirely within that person's personal decision to do what they want. So like everybody hated me on both sides. Same thing with Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp. I was like, they're both pieces of crap and I can prove it to you with item after item. So I would do shows on both of them. Same show would be both people. I would still get tons and tons of hate mail. I don't know. But Brian Kemp, the big thing for him, which was before election integrity became an issue. And my guess is that he was the powers that be selection because they knew that he would go along with any kind of election shenanigans, because I don't know if you know this, but in 2016, he was Secretary of State when there was an absolute breach in the server. So that I remember saying, like, this guy cannot be trusted. You can't make him president. He's a governor. He absolutely cannot be trusted. So I hope. And Stacey Abrams, Miss Fair Fight, Miss All I Care About Is Election Integrity, didn't even bring it up. Like,
oh, not only that, because she was going to exploit it, and on top of it, she's a Bilderberger asset. Like
I know,
like you guys, she cares about the people. She's hanging out with billionaires over in Europe. What are you talking about? She's not a billionaire. She is somebody that they can manipulate so that she'll do their bidding. Like, I'll tell you right now, Stacey Abrams runs. Have fun. Like, I'm gonna.
That would be super fun. I should send you my show from that era.
Please
I
do.
think Garland was even on it because he filed a lawsuit against Brian Kemp for that, and the Attorney General said no, would not prosecute it, which made no sense. But I go through her like 10 internships, the State Department, Yukos Oil for the Kissinger Foundation, where she was literally trying to manipulate Russian kids.
Bring it on.
Oh my gosh, it's so great. I've done a few stories on her. She is deep state, starting when she was in high school. So I'm happy to share that with you. Oh yeah. And the Brian Kemp stuff too is like shocking. So I'll be 100% in your corner, even though I'm no longer in Georgia, but I'll give you a platform. Half my listeners are still in Georgia. And what can people do to find you, to listen to you, to help you? Bring it.
Yeah, Radical Pod, I'm going to self-fund. So it's one of those things where I stay away from special interests. I'm going to provide a service, and if people like it, then I'll do a lot better than if they don't like it. It's one of those things. You got to practice what you preach, right? So it's, hey, market. I'm not going to take a salary. If I am governor, we are going to push for energy independence. We're going to free the farmers to grow whatever the hell they want. So if they want to go hemp, they can go hemp, and we can start creating biodiesel. But radicalpod.com, it's got all my links. My show is there. And I'm every major podcatcher. Radical is the name of the show, obviously. But yeah, if people want to help, they want to volunteer, I'll get them plugged in. And, it's going to be a completely different type of campaign than people are used to. And, that's what we got to be. We got to stop trying to like gain their favor and be like them, and start being completely damn different from these people. Like the scourge of the earth. Why would you want to be like them? I don't want their approval. I just want to kick them in the nuts.
I am finally on that page. It took a long time for this soccer mom to say, I don't care what you think of me. You're the problem, lady. You're the fucking problem. You move if you don't want to sit within 6 feet of me.
That's right.
So, and I actually had you on by absolute popular demand. As I said, so many of my listeners are from Georgia, and they love you. And I'm sure that you will be successful. And I cannot wait. And anytime you want to come on, or anything we can do to get the word out, call to action. And we'll be listening to your podcast in the meanwhile. So thank you so much, Shane Hazel, for your time.
Honored.